On last Saturday, the 11th of May, a grim milestone was reached. The war in Ukraine had raged on for 800 long days. Despite this, the situation remained tense and uncertain, with a reminder that peace is still a distant dream. As Russia continued its aggressive onslaught across Ukraine, each day passed with the unsettling question, what worse could possibly happen today? So, in this video, we are going to take a closer look at the recent updates on the war and how Ukraine is planning to handle things. To retaliate, for example, in the village of Kinki on the Russian side of the Daiper River, Ukrainians are trying to gain a foothold, but we are not sure if they're in control. It's clear, though, that Ukrainian groups are in the area, causing trouble and attacking Russian positions. This means that the Russians haven't been able to push the Ukrainians back. Also, the Ukrainians are trying to cross the Daiper River and set up infantry there, which means they're still active in the region. The Ukrainians have been using more FPV drones to strike, especially along the Daiper River. This has made the Russians respond by using KPV drones as well as their usual missiles and bombs. It looks like the Russians are changing their tactics to deal with the Ukrainians, and they might even send groups to the Ukrainian side of the river to hold on to territory. As you can see, both sides are leaving no stone unturned to get the upper hand. The Russians are using drones to watch over the supply roads and are taking over ruins and buildings with motorcycle stormtroopers. Because the Ukrainians have used heavy artillery fire to get into some buildings in Robani, the Russians are also trying to cut off Ukrainian supplies and engaging in FPV drone attacks on Ukrainian positions near. Meanwhile, in the town of Paris, the first wave of Russian forces has already arrived. They've seized a few buildings, marking their territory. The 79th Sassa Brigade is already feeling the heat. They're running low on supplies and backup, and morale is dipping. They're worried the Russians are inching closer to the 0524 road, aiming to cut it off. Also in Paba, the situation is tense. Skirmishes are constant, and the 79th Brigade admits that they don't have full control. The Russians are relentless, their eyes set on the 0524 road. They keep on pushing more and more, hoping to cut the road off physically. The Russians have really been successful in their counter-artillery operations, taking out several artillery systems, including 20 to 30 Hubzards. They're now trying to clear the area, aiming to wrap up in Paba and move towards Constantine. The clashes are growing fiercer by the day, and the Russians have taken complete control of the central industrial zone. Due to these reasons, the Ukrainians are thinking about pulling back. Zinsky and his commanders are weighing their options, considering forcing their troops to fight to the bitter end. Officers are scratching their heads, trying to solve the discord between the generals and the soldiers on the ground. The soldiers, on the other hand, are focused on one thing: survival. This sentiment is especially strong among the Ukrainians in the eastern high-rise buildings. The Russians are closing in, and if they push a bit further north, they'll reach the low-rise residential area. The threat of encirclement by the Russians is growing stronger, and that's not all. Over at New Voice Camp, there's another crucial update. It seems the Russians may have trapped a large number of Ukrainians near a cauldron there. The deep state reports slight improvements in the Russian positions, but there's a glimmer of hope. The Ukrainians might have retaken control of Nova MVA village. Videos have surfaced showing Russian bombs falling on Ukrainian forces, confirming that Ukrainians are indeed there. The latest news from NVA tells us that Russians are trying to block the main road from a place called NetVV. Recent news hints that Russians have crossed this road also and are getting closer to the outskirts of a village in the west-northwest. It seems like the Russians might take over this village anytime soon. Now let's shift our focus to Orca. If you look here, it looks like the Russians have fortified their position near the main defense line between Orca and its west. We can expect some clashes here as the 25th Airborne Brigade is defending this stronghold. There are also reports of Russians making progress towards the northwest of Kappa and a village named Nova Paka, even capturing some fields recently. There's another video showing a Russian soldier raising their flag in Keramik, confirming their control there. This comes after they took control of Aranovsky, suggesting a significant stronghold for their future operations. Meanwhile, intense battles continue in the eastern region with videos of Russian drone strikes as proof, but there's no confirmed news of Russian soldiers in the eastern part. With Victory Day just 4 days away, it seems unlikely that Russians will be able to capture this eastern sector. The main roads used for supplies in Ukraine are in ruins, blocked by damaged and abandoned vehicles used for road repairs. This situation is tricky for both Russians and Ukrainians. Russians haven't been able to take control of the entire bank of the Sand River, to the south of the eastern part of a place called Shabara. They've been bombing and attacking this area, showing the correct configuration of the combat line in this direction. There are reports of Russians trying to storm the area and remove Ukrainians from the first buildings. Russian forces are pushing in this direction too. A fascinating video from B. Horka shows Ukrainian strongholds and fortification shelters destroyed by Russian forces since the start of May. Russians have been focusing on this territory, with Ukrainians trying to control territories and fields to the south. As Russians continue to clear the area, they might try to surround B. Horka from the southwest. Well now, let's take a journey into the heart of the conflict. The latest news tells us that the Russians have taken over Kotara. This isn't just hearsay. It's been confirmed by multiple trustworthy sources, including firms deep within the Syrian state. The Ukrainians are holding on to the western part, but it's a tough fight. Despite the odds, the Russians are pushing forward, and it looks like they might take the village soon. But that's not all. The Russians have been busy in Anka, just north of Katli Ara. They've been spotted doing reconnaissance, likely gearing up for more action. Tensions are rising in this region, and we can expect more clashes as things heat up. Up now, let's shift our focus to the Kar region. The Russian forces are on a roll, obliterating Ukrainian positions. Their latest weapon, the Skander, has just arrived. A video from Oleksandrivka reveals a large group of Ukrainian forces hiding in the trees, complete with tracks, light vehicles, artillery systems, and FP positions. The Russians didn't waste any time. They relayed the information to their forces and launched an OTR-21 Taker-Oris Skander strike, causing heavy losses for the Ukrainians. As a result, we're seeing more convoys and groups of forces under intense fire. It looks like the Russians are gearing up for the next phase of their advance, likely heading towards Kharkiv. The Ukrainian deputy Garin has made a statement. If their forces aren't enough, they might ask for European troops to be sent to Ukraine. But there's a catch. This can only happen before May 21st, while Zelensky still has legal power in the area. The situation is tough, and today, being Orthodox Easter, things might quiet down a bit. But after a short pause, the Russians might try to take control and establish towns after May 9th. We're seriously expecting a major event, but amidst all these, there's a plot twist brewing somewhere else. Big news came from the USA. Word on the street is that they might have to send soldiers to Ukraine. Jeff, a top Democrat, thinks this could happen if Ukraine's defenses crumble, but that's not all. Europe is stirring too. Remember France's promise to send more troops? Well, some say they've already started acting on it. Colonel Alexander Var, a French army officer, hinted on LCTV that France could dispatch 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers if needed. Doesn't sound like much, right? But imagine if 10 or 20 countries like the UK, France, Spain, Germany, the USA, Italy, the Czech Republic, and Poland, all NATO and EU members, did the same. We could be looking at a 100,000 strong force. Meanwhile, China's Xi Jinping has been busy. He's just returned from talks with Macron, likely about the Ukraine crisis. Xi Jinping says China wants to work with France and the world to solve the crisis. Not only that, but Poland also thinks China could even persuade Putin to stop the war. Polish Foreign Minister Róż Sikorski named a few potential peacemakers, including Turkey, the UN, and China. But here's where it gets interesting. Russia is also making bold moves. They're ramping up their non-strategic nuclear forces with missile, aviation, and Navy exercises in the southern military district. Could this be a reaction to the US and French plans? Plus, Russia's expanding its wanted list for Ukraine, adding the ex-head of Ukrainian police. It seems they're ready to make some arrests. Sources say Ukrainians will soon get artillery rounds with a 100-kilometer range, the longest yet. When will this happen? Maybe when the French Oros forces arrive. And last night, 2 explosions rocked Vyshhorod, north of Kiev. Could another foreign forces headquarters or concentration have been hit? Stay tuned for more updates. The spotlight is now on the ground battles, where a lot is happening, especially in the Donetsk region. The Russians have shown off their super tough turtle tanks in a new video, which is a big problem for the Ukrainian defenses. These tanks are being used to break through the Ukrainian defense lines in the Val artillery pocket. The Russians are still moving forward, with reports suggesting they're gaining more control over the area. Also, in Nail, the Russians have strengthened their positions, including taking over tall buildings and getting closer to the main supply road. The Russians have also strengthened their hold on the fields between Novosaliva and Yansky, with most of the fields now under Russian control. They've also broken through the defense line in Oleksandrivka and taken over the first buildings and streets of the settlement. And not only that region, but the eastern Shavar direction is also seeing heavy fighting, but there's no confirmation or videos yet. The situation hasn't changed at all, with the Russians still bombing in the Bakash area. The Russian armed forces have made a lot of progress in the fields around Anna. The Russians have also tried again to attack Ukrainian positions using their turtle tanks. Along with that, the Russians have launched several waves of attacks with a large armored force overpowering the Ukrainian defenses. Despite the Ukrainians trying to fight back, they haven't been able to effectively fight off the Russian tanks. The Russians have successfully broken through the Ukrainian defense line, landed infantry, and pulled back safely, even though some of their armored vehicles were destroyed, which is to be expected in these kinds of operations. The Russians are closing in, having taken over a large chunk of land that's on the edge of Ukraine's defense line. This land is filled with complex fortifications, painstakingly built by the Ukrainians over the past months. The Russians are ready to fight to keep this land and the trenches that lead west. They're trying to surround the Ukrainian soldiers, maybe to force them to pull back. The Russians have reportedly taken over the town of Klea in the north of the conflict zone, which could let them push further west. Meanwhile, Ukrainian soldiers are out in the fields trying to hold their ground against the Russian onslaught. The Russians are using flamethrowers and heavy weapons to attack Ukrainian positions along the railways. Without strong defenses to slow them down, the Ukrainians might have to pull back from Stepal, possibly moving even further west towards Kurva. Considering all these signs, it only points to a big offensive from the Russians coming soon. The tension is mounting, and any next move could just change everything. So, what are your thoughts on the situation? How do you think it will unfold? Share your insights in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more breaking news updates.